Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's a pleasure to be on this kind of a platform with students in the center of Europe, in a place where a lot of action took place, maybe in the last, century. And obviously, it's a place where liberalism actually flourished, even at the time of Hitler himself, which is something that is not very well known to German people, because they usually associate Hitler and the Nazi Party with fascism. But there was a flourishing social liberal society, especially in Berlin, before and after this time. And we'll talk about the compatibility or lack thereof between liberalism and fascism, because sometimes you can have a compatibility with these two things. Today, inshallah, what I wanted to do is, because we don't have such a huge group, it makes sense to make it more intimate. I've already got a lot of material online in terms of lectures on liberalism, which you can access. And I've actually released a small treatise called the Treatise on a Liberal Critique of Ridda, which is a very small pamphlet book, which you can read in a very short space of time. And this small pamphlet book is, it compares basically the rule of Ridda, or the Hadd of Ridda, the apostasy law, so-called apostasy law, with treason. And it does so using live examples and looking at the liberal tradition, and then looking again at the Islamic tradition and seeing where they are similar and different. So these are just some of the materials that are online that you may be able to access in your own time, because the reason why I wrote that particular book, which was actually one of my dissertations, I took the opportunity to study under one of the leading liberal thinkers in the UK. And I wanted to kind of see if what I was saying about the comparison between liberalism and Islam was academically robust enough. So I put it through a peer review type process where I had guided peer review. And obviously my teacher was telling me where I was going wrong, or what would be better to say, or how I could make the argument better. But the fact that it went through the process gives me more confidence in the argument. So the reason why I did Ridda is because it is the most severe of punishments. And so you can analogize backwards, or qis ala dhalik, as they say in Arabic, right? You can, if the case of Ridda is dealt with, then everything else in terms of hudud can be dealt with. Because the main concern for Muslims in terms of how liberalism affects their worldview and how it can produce or pronounce or compound shubuhat or doubts that they may have about the religion, especially in the field of morality, of what is referred to as akhlaqiyat, is that when someone is conditioned into the liberal philosophical paradigm and then they approach the Quran, they may have doubts in Islam, because when they were younger, on key issues to do with tolerance and allowances and disallowances, there was a certain philosophy that they had been drip fed without knowing, which is this liberal, we call meta ethic. It's the dominant ethic in the West. And so it creates shubuhat, just as when someone is, without knowing, immersed in a feminist ideology, or more particularly the second wave feminist ideology, and then they approach a surah of the Quran like Surah An-Nisa, or they approach other parts of the Quran or ahadith or ahkam, which differentiate roles between men and women, it immediately causes doubts for people like this that have been conditioned into this paradigm. And these doubts can sometimes be very crippling, and sometimes can be debilitating and sometimes can even stop one from having yaqeen or certainty about the religion of Islam. And these doubts would not have existed 100 years ago. So in the sense that because these ideologies, many of them have gone through phases, like in the case of liberalism, it's obviously there since the 16th century, but its most modern manifestations kind of crystallized in the Victorian era, when you had John Stuart Mill. He's a particular philosopher who wrote about it extensively. And so the harm principle, which is the golden principle of you are free to do whatever you want to do so long as you don't harm anybody else, this became the major way of reasoning ethically. And so with this, obviously, there is allowance in terms of homosexuality, in terms of the LGBTQ movement, in terms of religious freedoms, all of those kinds of things, many of which, not all of which, but many of which, there is a tension with Islamic principles. And so this is where the shubuhat come in, this is where doubts come in for somebody who is sincerely trying to connect themselves with their Lord. This is the case also, as I've mentioned or alluded to, with feminism. So after the 60s, where serious questions were asked by white women, particularly in the West, and usually in the United States, but also in other spheres, other places, about equal pay, about domestic chores, about the institution of marriage, and about motherhood. These questions now would act like an ethic. And so when somebody who has been conditioned because they have grown up in the West, in Germany, in Belgium, in Holland, in the UK, in the US, or indeed even in the Middle East itself, where we think that we have Islamic countries, but many of them have been influenced by Western colonialism, ideological colonialism, through the media, through the education system, through direct colonialization. I mean, most of the countries in the Middle East were colonized by liberal countries. I mean, don't forget the Napoleon Wars, the Napoleonic Wars that took place in the 18th century. This was a mission to try and spread liberalism by the sword, if you like. Of course, Napoleon went into Egypt and many different countries. But if you look at the details of what happened when he went into Egypt, you'll see that he didn't just direct his attention to military encroachment. He wanted to take over the education system. He wanted to change people's minds. So this process of indoctrination and ideological hegemony has been going over for almost 150 to 200 years, even in the Middle East. So it's very strong. It's so strong that you may grow up thinking that this is right and this is wrong, and you really have a fixed morality because of what you were taught in school, of what you hear in the news, of what you read in newspapers, or wherever it may be. This culminates. We cannot pretend that it doesn't have an impact on us. And it seems so intuitive. A lot of these ethics seem so intuitive. You feel like this is the way it should be. And imagine now we have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Muslims tens of millions in Europe and tens of millions in the West. They're all going through this process. So when they're growing up now, they were told by their teachers, they were told by even watching films and news programs, whatever it is, this is morality. أنت حر ما لا تضر, or you are free to do whatever you like so long as you don't harm anybody else. And if you get in the way of that, you are unethical. So the problem now, or the issue, is deconstructing, or the mission, objective is to deconstruct this. Because a lot of us, especially when we're dealing in so-called Islamic apologetics, someone asks us questions and we sometimes get on the back foot, and sometimes it's important to answer questions directly. And sometimes there are serious misconceptions that people have about the religion of Islam. But we feel like we need to answer in the paradigm of liberalism or in the paradigm of feminism. But we have a different paradigm to these paradigms. So what needs to happen is we need to argue why our paradigm is more important or more true than those paradigms. So for instance, if we look at liberalism, and before I say when we look at liberalism, let me talk in generalities first. In general, anything that you have, whether it is an ideology or a machine, like a physical machine, right? It can be broken down into different parts. So you have core components. For example, if I have a machine, the core components will be the metal, the bolts, all of these things. These are the core components of the machine. Likewise, in ideology, you break the ideology down and you have core components, which are referred to as first principles. First principles. Now, if the first principles are wrong or are unprovable or are unscientific, or whatever you want to call it, illogical, then whatever you're going to say after that, or whatever you're going to build upon it, is also built upon false foundations. The premise, liberalism is based on something called the hedonistic principle. Okay, it's called the hedonistic principle. Now, this hedonistic principle was mentioned by practically all liberal philosophers from John Locke all the way through to John Stuart Mill. The hedonistic principle is the assumption that what is good for you is that which is most pleasurable for you and that which is least painful for you. It's quite simple, actually. So the hedonistic principle is what is good for you is that which is most pleasurable for you and that which is least painful for you. Now, already this is sounding like self-worship. I mean, in the Quran, there's a verse that says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who has taken his own self as a Lord? And indeed, this is practically what it is. I mean, you are, according to this paradigm, the hedonistic principle is the most important thing in life for dictating what is right and what is wrong. So if you want to put it in a very crude and simplistic way, the hedonistic principle says, whatever feels good is right, and whatever feels bad is wrong. Okay. Now, when liberalism started to develop, when I say liberalism here, I'm talking about social liberalism rather than capitalism and other types of liberalism or supply side or whatever. I'm talking about social liberalism. It kind of morphed into something called utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism says the same thing as this hedonistic principle. It says that what is good is what is pleasurable, and what is bad is what is painful. But this formula is now taken as a societal formula. So Jeremy Bentham, who is the leader of or the founder of utilitarianism, he says the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay. The greatest good for the greatest number. Meaning what feels good and what is pleasurable for the maximum amount of people. Is everyone okay with this so far? This is the principle, right? That is the greatest good for the greatest number. We were talking about first principles, and we said if we had to say that there was one major first principle of liberalism, of social liberalism, it is the hedonistic principle. Okay, and the hedonistic principle says if you're doing something which is pleasurable, then it's good for you. And if you're doing something which is painful, it's bad for you. Then we said this morphed into an kind of another ideology, if you want to call it that, called utilitarianism, which said, so what we should be aiming for, or what governments should be trying to facilitate, is the greatest good for the greatest number. And when they say the greatest good, what they mean is the most pleasure for the most number of people. Now, someone may say, and this is what the criticism of this was. The criticism of this was that, well, if you say this, the greatest good for the greatest number, the problem is you can justify causing pain to people if and only if it causes more pleasure for more people. So, for example, some people were saying, this common example that is used to really make this point very clear is a gang rape example. Okay. So gang rape, you have let's say five men and one woman. And these five men, they want to feel pleasure because for them, pleasure is good and pain is bad. And rape for those five men causes pleasure. So if all five men have a pleasurable time at the expense of the pain of that one woman, now they will say this is not against the formula, which is the greatest good for the greatest number. So John Stuart Mill, he said, there's a problem here. He said, what kind of society will we have if we have such violations to the self, to property, to to the human being, and so on? So he said, okay, let's keep the formulation in place. We will keep the formulation in place, which is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. However, we will say you can do anything you like to cause you pleasure, so long as you do not harm anybody else. And this became known as the harm principle. And this is the harm principle, which is that you can do anything you like so long as you don't harm anyone else, is the bedrock of social liberalism. It is the core of social liberalism. It is the heart of social liberalism. And you could even say it is a definition of social liberalism. You can even define social liberalism as the harm principle. I think many encyclopedias do this, like Britannica. They define liberalism, social liberalism, with the harm principle. So they say social liberalism is that you can do whatever you like so long as you don't harm anybody else. Now, we understand the history of their principle, and we understand what happens when you believe this. Now, if you believe this, there are many things that become permissible. For example, homosexual rights. There is no incompatibility between homosexual rights and the harm principle. Unless someone makes an argument, and this argument can be made from sexually transmitted diseases, which to say that, they spread more diseases and something like that, and so it's causing harm, much like what's happening with, women in the gang rape scenario, but it's obviously not as direct, it's indirect harm. You can make those arguments, but by and large, you are allowed to believe in, do, and say whatever you like, so long as you don't harm anybody else. Now, if you now approach the Quran and the Sunnah with this, there will be things which are compatible and things which are incompatible. If you approach the Quran with this, there are things, yes, which the Quran allows freedom in, and some things, no, it doesn't allow freedom in. For example, Allah says in the Quran, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to can believe, and whoever wants to can disbelieve. This seems to be in line with the idea that you can believe in whatever you like, so long as you don't harm anybody else. However, there are other verses in the Quran. ما كان لمؤمن ولا مؤمنة إذا قضى الله ورسوله أمرا أن يكون لهم الخيرة من أمرهم. For example, it wasn't for a believing man or a believing woman, if Allah and the Messenger have said something, that they may have a choice in the matter. Now, of course, this is against liberal reasoning, because the liberal says you are your own boss. You are employed to yourself, if you like. There's no such, the person who knows what's best for you is you. They say this is individualism, okay? Which is an important key word here. Individualism is the idea that the one who knows best for you is you. You know the best for you. Now, within liberalism, there is a discussion, and it's a new discussion actually in the last 20 or 30 years. There is a discussion between what you refer to as communitarians, not communists. Yeah, they are called communitarians and individualists. Okay, so there are some people who say, actually, you don't know what's best for you, but it's a team effort. It is something which is the community. It knows we are interdependent, and we require the community. And they will even say, if something harms the entirety of the community, it is muqaddam, it is prioritized over the individual. But they have their own limitations. They are still liberals at the end of the day, right? But the liberal understanding, for the most part, is an individualistic one, that you know what's best for you. Obviously, the Islamic understanding is not like this. The Islamic understanding says, once you submit to God, God is the one who knows what's best for you. God is the ultimate authority and the ultimate wisdom and the all-knowing entity. He is Al-Alim, Al-Hakim. He knows what is best for you, not you. You don't know what is best for you. The Quran says, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Does he not know what he has created? And he is the all-subtle, all-aware. So there is a tension here, once again, between liberalism and individualism in particular, and what the Quran says about Allah and how He knows all there is to know about anything. So you may say it is like going to the doctor. You see, when you go to the doctor says to you, he does something called a diagnostic. So he sees what symptoms you have and what issues you have. Maybe he runs a few tests or she runs a few tests. And at the end of it, the doctor will conclude that this is what you need to do. Either go to another specialist, or I'll give you a prescription, or you require surgery, or whatever it may be. Now, the truth is, for the most part, a lay audience will accept the authority of the doctor because the doctor knows more than the laity. The doctor knows more than the awam, the laity. Therefore, when the doctor says, here is the prescription, and here is the, we submit to that authority because we believe the authority has more knowledge and wisdom than we do on these matters, on matters relating to medicine. Now, the same can be said from the Islamic paradigm, that we believe that Allah, if we truly believe in the Quran and the Sunnah, He knows what's best for us. He is Al-Alim and He is Al-Hakim. So there is no requirement for us to do a self-diagnostic or to try and find out, if you like, x-ray ourselves, metaphorically, yani, and try and find out what the issues are, and then proceed to prescribing for ourselves the right remedies. We say the blueprint is in the Quran and is in the Sunnah. So there is a clear tension between the Islamic paradigm, which talks about submission being to the one God, the Alim, the Hakim, and the individualistic paradigm, yes, of liberalism, even if we consider communitarian beliefs, which is this idea that the community might have more currency than the individual, which is kind of a school of thought within social liberalism. You have people like Michael Sandel, who has a book called The Theories of Justice. And by the way, if you want to know about liberalism and you want to know about Western philosophy, the best lecture series online is by this man called Michael Sandel. And if you're interested in further reading, in addition to what I've mentioned, my lectures, the book that I've written, after you've done that, you may want to see this series. It's a Harvard University lecture series. It's about justice. It's probably the best thing on the internet on this. So he's a communitarian, and we're not saying that there does not exist that school of thought within liberalism. It does exist. But what we are saying is that there seems to be some kind of conflict on that fundamental level. Now, there is actual reconciliation on another level, and I'll tell you where it is. There is reconciliation between what you call Contractarianism. Okay. Contractarianism is a very important principle within liberalism, which stipulates that there is a contract, a contract between the people and the government. Now, did we choose to sign this aqd? No, we did not choose this. You are in contract with the government so long as you are born or you emigrate to a country, you are now in contract with. So most of you maybe have been born in Germany. As soon as you are born in Germany and you have a German passport, now you are under contract with the German government. Actually, this is not a voluntary contract. This is a forced contract. You have no choice in the matter. Why? Because if you want to stay within the parameters of what is referred to as the country of Germany, then you must obey the law of Germany. And you must be in contract with the government in so much as that you will obey the law of Germany. You have no choice in the matter. No one is asking you whether you want to or don't want to. As soon as you are born into it, that's how it goes. The truth of the matter is, contractarianism, it's a way that liberalism can prevent itself from being anarchy. Now, anarchy is where there is no government and people are all trying to self-rule. And there are some people within the liberal tradition, like Nozick and others, utopian society, that actually believe in that we should be moving to an anarchy state. That kind of thing is best. But the truth of the matter is, the overwhelming opinion, if not the vast majority of opinion, in addition to all of the liberal countries that have ever existed, have been contractarian liberalism, which is this idea that you are in a contract with the government. Now, if you technically break this contract, your freedoms will be taken away. Now, whether that is freedom of movement, so that you'll be sent to prison, or whether that is your life itself. I mean, there are many liberal countries that still have death penalties and that have had death penalties for a very long time. And really and truly, there is no direct contradiction between a contractarian form of liberalism and the death penalty. Because if you are in contract and it's a forced contract and you didn't have a say in the matter and you go against the contract, then the government may step in and do whatever it says it will do in its laws. This is fully in line with contractarian liberalism. And not only is this in line with contractarian liberalism, I may add, and this is very important, that liberalism is not incompatible with racism. Okay, it is not incompatible. Because you can have, it's conceivable to have a liberal racist society. It's very possible. All they need to say is they may put in their contracts or they may put in their manifestos that they believe that one race or one country is superior to another. And surely this is what happened in the colonial period. And moreover, as I have mentioned or alluded to before, it's happened in Germany. I mean, we're talking Hitler was working for the most part. I mean, he was elected democratically in the beginning. And then obviously everyone knows the history. He kind of got rid of the democracy and started taking over it himself. But the fact of the matter is, the German people elected Adolf Hitler. That's the truth. And the fact of the matter is, he put in place, through the processes of democracy and liberalism, obviously democracy did not exist, yes, after a while, because he got rid of it. But he put in place all of these racist policies. Now, the point I'm making is, you can find many examples of liberal colonialism, liberal racism, liberal fascism. For instance, I was just mentioning Napoleon and how he had these Napoleonic wars. And literally, he was trying to spread liberalism by the sword. In America, almost all presidents, including Obama himself and all of those people, they believe in a concept, and you can research it. It's called manifest destiny. Okay. And this manifest destiny is the idea of westward expansion, that America will continue expanding its empire to the west and beyond. So when originally the European settlers came into this place, they started expanding west and killing the natives and taking their land. Remember, these people were liberals. Okay, this was after John Locke. They were all liberals. And they expanded westward. And up until today, they believe in manifest destiny. Almost all the presidents that have ever existed in the United States believe in this concept. And they are on record believing in this concept. So the point is this. The point is, when liberals, when they attack the hudud of Islam, the question is, but is it inconceivable that you may have a liberal system with hudud? Because this su'al, this question, was actually directly dealt with by John Locke himself. So John Locke answered, he said, if liberalism existed for the people, the Israelites, the Jews, and I mentioned this in my book that you can get about the critiques of a treatise on the liberal critiques of Ridda. He said that, and there was a death penalty for apostasy. He said, I don't see this as a problem. And this is the founder of liberalism. Now, someone may say, okay, well, it's the founder of liberalism, which is John Locke. But now the times have changed, my friend. That's what the people say to me. I say, I'm not talking about whether the times have changed or not. I am saying that the principles of liberalism, which we've described as not just being the hedonistic principle, but now you have another thing, which is contractarianism, the idea of a social contract between the people and the government. If the government decides that it's going to have a death penalty for treason or for whatever it may be, even John Locke says apostasy. Someone leaves the religion of Judaism. He was using Judaism as an example. He says this is absolutely fine. It's not against the liberalism, which actually is very unusual, because we may think that, well, liberalism, it tells us about freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It does tell us about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but it also puts a big emphasis on that the government is in control, and that if people break the law, that the freedoms and all those freedoms that we've talked about can be manifestly taken away by the government. So it's not inconceivable on a liberal framework that any of the hudud of Islam that these people have a problem with may be implemented. Like, for instance, with the Quran, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَقَطَعُوا أَيْدِيهُمَا, جَزَاءً بِمَا كَسَبَ نَكَالًا مِنَ اللَّهِ. The one who, the thief, the male and the female thief, cut their hands off as a recompense for what they have done, and as an admonition for the rest, or deterrent, نَكَالًا مِنَ اللَّهِ, from Allah. Now, the question is such a had of cutting the hand off, is this against a contractarian understanding of liberalism? Not really. There's no way one can argue that, especially if someone believes in democracy. I had a person who has become munharif, become a deviant. I don't know if he's even a Muslim or not. He is working with this guy called Majid Nawaz, who is in the Quilliam Foundation in the UK. It's an anti-Muslim foundation that attacks Islam and Muslims, that is spearheaded by an ex-Muslim called Majid Nawaz. But his friend, his name is Adam Dean, who used to do dawah. Actually, he was a dawah figure, and then he became munharif. He became a deviant, and maybe even an ex-Muslim, we don't know. This person, I saw him one time, and he brought up this verse, the السارق والسارقة, فقطعوا أيديهما جزاء بما كسبا نكالا من الله. And he said, what do you think about it saying the male and the female thief? I asked him a question. I said to him, do you believe in democracy? And obviously he says, yes, I believe in democracy. I said, so what does it mean to believe in democracy? He said, it means that if the majority of people in a society, they decide upon something, that thing must be implemented as part of law, or it should be, at least in representative democracy. That's how it works. They choose a leader, the leader represents them. And sometimes you have referendums, which is a direct form of democracy. But he believes in democracy. I said, what if, for the sake of argument, we had a country of Muslim inhabitants, and this country with Muslim inhabitants done a referendum on what should be the punishment for a thief. And let us say we have a sweeping majority of 95% of people who say that the punishment should be the amputation of a limb. Now, should we make the law in line with this will of the people or not? And he was kind of finding it difficult to answer this question. I asked the same question to Lars Gull, who is a professor in liberalism, when I went to Norway and debated him. And he said no. He said it because it's a catch-22 question. I saw he was very frustrated, but at the end of it, he said no, even if 95, 99, or even 100% of people, they agreed that there should be cutting of the hand, there should not be cutting of the hand. This is his position, which is a anti-democratic position. So my question to him is, when do we decide when to be democratic and when not to be democratic? It seems like the democracies that they want to allow are the democracies that go in line with their aesthetic value judgments. There's nothing in liberalism that says that on a contractual form that says that this punishment is problematic. On a purely philosophical or legal format, there's nothing. And as I have mentioned, certainly in a democratic society, this can happen. So what is the issue here? The issue is that people have personal preferences. And now it becomes not an argument from liberalism or even an argument from democracy. It becomes an argument from personal preference. I don't like to see this. I don't like to. And then I asked him another question. I said, what do you think of bestiality? And the clip is online. You know, you can research this. Bestiality is having intercourse with an animal. And he said, I allow this. He said, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I was wondering how it may be the case that a man, or a woman for that matter, may have intercourse with a dog, which, by the way, in many countries they allow this. I don't know what the rules are. I don't think Germany is one of them. That you may have intercourse with a dog, and this is allowed. But cutting the hand of the thief, this is disgusting. Sa'ama yahkumun, as the Quran says. I mean, it seems like it's just it becomes what you call aesthetic value judgment.
It's picking and choosing, really. So
yes, it's just it's become flavor. Like what you like. Do you like this flavor or you don't like that flavor? Which one you want? The point is, it's not even argued for using their ideologies, because you can easily make an argument against having sex with a dog from a liberal perspective, because the dog does not have consent. How is the dog meant to give you consent? It doesn't even speak. You will have to rape the dog. Actually, this is what will have to happen. There's no chance, because you can't. How do you know if the dog wants to do it or not? It's like the dog is like a child, actually, in many ways. If you allow it for a dog, then the next thing is you allow it for a child, because the child is full. He doesn't know what's going on. So if you can do it to a dog, then you can do it to. And if not a dog, what is it going to be? A horse? Sorry to say. Like, this is going on in liberal countries. But when you start to let them see that their principles are being defied by their prescriptions, then they start to realize that they are incoherent and inconsistent. I always use this example. I think it's probably one of the best examples. Proponents of LGBTQ, which is homosexuality and whatever, and bisexuality and all those things, they never, or I'm not going to say never, but for the most part, they have not included a community of incestuous people into their league. Why is it not LGBTQI, incest? I for incest. Because on liberalism, there's nothing wrong with a brother and a sister having intercourse with one another, so long as no deformed child comes as a result. So, for example, if they use protection, or they experiment with some other kind of sexual activity which is not penetrative, why don't they bring and they get very offended by this. And I have many videos asking them about this, and they all get very angry. Why are you getting angry? When we use your very principles, the hedonistic principle and the harm principle and the contractual principle, these are the principles we are dealing with. I'm not talking about what the mu'assisun or the founders of your ideology say per se. I don't care what they have to say. I'm saying these are the foundations of your ideology. And using the foundations of your ideology, it should be as permissible for a brother and sister, or even a mother and daughter, or any of this, to have intercourse with one another and to be in a sexually explicit relationship with one another, so long as they are not harming anybody else. But they have not made this legal in any of the Western countries. Now, when you start to show them their inconsistencies, they realize, they either admit that, and recently some people have been admitting it, say, I haven't got a problem with incest. Yeah, it should be illegal as well, and whatever. No problem. At least you're being consistent. But if they go down the route of inconsistencies, this is problematic. But on what basis do you have a right to criticize Islam on a moral basis? Like, Islam is giving a set of moralities in the form of prescriptions, many of which are conceivable. Number one, yani, they are conceivable, meaning they can be legitimized through liberalism. And many of them may not be, but they may be legitimized on a democratic reasoning. So the arguments start to become undone, almost all of them, one by one. And this is the approach that needs to be had. Because before, I mean, I know this is Aqidah series. You know, we had, the Mu'tazila and this and Jahmiyyah, I don't know, like these groups, right?
Yes.
In the past. And yes, they did come into, and there was a big discussion among the Muslim, the Ash'a'ira and the Mu'tazila and the Ahl Hadith and all this, Ahl Hadith and all of them talking about things. And there's very important discussions, Asma al Sifat and this and that, all very important.
Yes.
But now that Aqidah Masail have become related to philosophy and the political philosophies of the day, which are liberalism and feminism, etc. And so we need to know what these people believe, why they believe it, the history of it, and then deconstruct it.
Right.
When we do that, this is going to protect your iman. I'm sure that the Mu'tazili discussions and all that is very important, but this will protect it more. And for the awam, it's more important. So we need to have the arguments ready for not only our friends and families, but we need to have the arguments ready for the broader communities which are ready to engage us. And in being in Germany, don't be shy to remind I don't know the culture there, and I don't know what's appropriate and not appropriate. But if I were there, and if someone was extremely arrogant with me, or if there was a group that was extremely arrogant, I would not be afraid to remind them that it was only a matter of 60 or 70 or 80 years since they've had the most catastrophic leader, expansionist leader by the name of Adolf Hitler that humanity has almost ever seen. Let them know that their grandparents and their great-grandparents, not even their great, maybe some of their parents, I mean, some of their parents actually, because we're talking about what, the 40s and 50s. Yeah, some of their parents may have been voting for Hitler and shaking his hand and being. So just remind them of this. And being in Germany, you must also make use of the point that, when you look at anti-Semitism and how it kind of, the lessons that one may draw from it, let them realize how marginalizing a minority community has put the worst stain on their historical record that they could ever imagine, and humiliated them in the worst way, economically, militarily, and culturally. So do not be afraid to show them that they are making, a lot of these people, especially the right wing, I'm sure you have a right wing in Germany and far right and all of this, they are nothing but new fascists. And just remind them of their history, and remind them and the broader community that actually, in terms of law, there's very many similarities between Islamic law and Jewish law. In terms of religion, there's many similarities, and they are just dealing with us the same way as they were dealing with the Jews in the past. So this is important. So I just wanted to put it out there, and I've spoken for quite some time now. Just to summarize what I wanted to kind of get through today, we talked about the principles of liberalism, social liberalism. And there are more than those, the ones I've mentioned. And you can see, if you want to know more information, I've written something called The Problems with Liberalism. And you can put my name and The Problems with Liberalism on Google, and you'll find an entire document there. It's free of charge. And you can also buy the little book. It's only like £1 or something for the printing fees. What I was going to say was, we have talked about the principles of liberalism, hedonistic principle, the pain, pleasure, how that morphed into utilitarianism, and how that morphed into the harm principle. We talked about how everything changed, or how the development of liberalism was. And we talked about the contractarian principle, or the contract, the social contract, which liberals believe in between people and their governments, and through which they can justify almost any law they like, including the death penalty. And also the fact that therefore they cannot attack Islam on any of its laws, especially those which allow the death penalty. And we spoke about some examples of inconsistencies in modern day liberalism, or liberal discourse, or legal liberalism. And with that, you can pretty much unpack anything that anyone asks you. So if someone asks you about zina, or sariq, the thief, and what happens to him, and how can you allow that is barbaric? You say, look, put emotions to the side. Why is it wrong on your worldview? If a democratic vote has been done by the majority, and it's a law that on contractarian liberalism is allowed. We spoke about all those things. I just thought about something now, which is what one of the liberals said. And I'm going to try and get the quote before the end of today. But I remember one of them saying, and I believe it was, I'll get you the quote, right? One of them said, if a liberal leader, a military leader, told you to go in the face of a cannon. Okay, you know a cannon, yeah?
Cannon, yes. Kanuna after.
and kill yourself in war, yeah, like suicide bomb or suicide attack. Sorry, this liberal theorist said this is all right. This should be done. And the same theorist, he said also, if not just if there's collateral damage in a war, he said that you can target the civilians. And this was one of the biggest. I'm going to try and find his name, but yeah, these things are all there in the corpus of liberal thought. Now we're going to open it to, inshallah, questions and answers. And if anyone has, yeah.
Inshallah. First of all, Jazakallah khair for this comprehensive summary of liberalism. You already mentioned very specific issues with the origin of the philosophy or the ideology of liberalism. You talked about the hedonistic principle as a first principle of this philosophy. So if you want to get to the core of it, you're basically talking about this principle, the hedonistic principle. And inshallah, we have some questions in the chat. And also, if people would like to talk directly, you can raise your hands, inshallah. But let me first start by maybe, I don't know if it's a correct observation of mine or not, but you were talking about the indoctrination of liberalism through education. And I have made the observation that, or that's how I feel, that the people who are more educated or get to a higher level of education, are more prone to get affected by this philosophy, liberalism, than people who, let's say, are less educated or didn't get into the higher education, the realm of higher education, universities and stuff like that. So do you think that's like a reason for why we feel that lots of Muslims who engage in academia and so on, they are more prone to be affected by liberalism and start to, see the Quran and the Sunnah as something metaphorical, not something which has to be taken seriously? Do you think that's the right observation, or what do you think about that?
I think that sociologically, there's evidence to suggest that Muslims with more money in the West are more likely to be attracted to liberalism than Muslims with less money. For instance, in California, well, I've been to California, I've been to like 4 different places there. And if I compare it with London, which the Muslims in London are very like of a working class background, I have found that what you're saying is true. And it's probably because of the pressure to fit in. A lot of this is psychological as well. I mean, when, for example, when America was letting people in, Muslims in, to come and immigrate into the country, they were letting people in that would add value to their economy. After World War II, the British economy, or the British even Britain as a country, was infrastructurally damaged because of the Second World War, and they wanted to bring in members of their previous colonies who were blue-collar workers to fix up the country. So obviously those people were not doctors and engineers. These people were just blue-collar workers. They brought them into the UK, and then they ghettoized certain communities. So we have entire places now in East London where there's a lot of, poorer people. I'm not sure if this is a very similar situation in because Germany is a bit unusual, because Germany is one of the most unusual cases. In Britain, we have people that have been that were part of previous colonies coming to Britain, like Indians and Pakistanis, right? In France, you have people that are part of, Algeria, Morocco, former colonies that come to France. But in Germany didn't colonize, any of the major countries of the Muslim world. So you have a lot of Turkish people. The majority of Muslims in Germany, as far as I know, are Turks.
Yes.
And Germany never colonized the Ottoman Empire. But it's probably because of the proximity or some geography. But whatever happened. So once again, I don't know if this whole working class distinction fits your paradigm or in your culture as much as it does in the UK and the US. Nevertheless, those people that came to America were doctors and engineers, and so they are, depending on what part of America now, because if we're talking about California, a lot of them had excess wealth and they were employed by, high profile places. And obviously, if you're going to work every day, okay, and the people around you, they are ethically liberal, then al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi at the end of the day. The believer is on the religion of his friend. It's difficult. It's difficult to be so practicing if everyone around you is a liberal. You're going to be a bit like them because you want to fit in. It's a psychological thing. But if you go to Philadelphia in America, where the majority of Muslims, they are black converts, this is a ghettoized community of Muslims who are likely to put the proverbial middle finger up to the West and the people that they consider the slave masters, and their attitudes is sometimes completely different, and sometimes in a positive way, because they don't have the shubuhat. I mean, if I were to ask you a question, right? If I had like 10 questions, like the 10 most morally understood shubuhat in Islam, I don't know, the had, the punishment, the sadaqah, this and that, ta'addud al-zawjat, all of these things. Let's go to Philadelphia and let's see how many, let's do a sociological study and see how many of those people, they have a problem with that. In Philadelphia, the polygamy is going on like nobody's business. It's happening more in Philadelphia than it has happening in the whole of Egypt, I believe. Everyone is doing it there. They don't have an issue with it, morally, ethically, or otherwise. They don't care about liberalism. These people, I'm not generalizing. Some of them do, but most of them, believe me, they're not going to be affected by that because they've always been used to being part of a subculture. Black Americans have always been part of a subculture, and when they come into Islam, they find Salafism very attractive because it's the most rambunctious sect, which gives you the most, like, if you like, in their understanding, raw kind of Islam, and they'll put the middle finger up to the entire of the USA and everything. I'm not generalizing, but this is the attitude. I've been there. I know what it feels like, right? But when you go to California, you have to be different because the kind of the Asians there, if you want, subcontinental Asians, they got this kind of reputation to protect, and they've been affected by their white liberal friends usually. And California is a blue state, is always been a blue state, a democratic state. So it's always different. So yeah, I agree with your analysis, and I think the reason why your analysis is correct is it's usually because when you have money, you're in the in the West, you're going to be in socialized groups of people who have the dominant ethic. And
not only in the West, I made the same observation in Egypt. I was born and raised in Egypt.
Yeah.
So I had the observation that the higher class citizens, those who go to German schools, American schools, I don't know, Canadian schools, and so on, they are a lot more prone to get affected by liberalism, by these shubuhat of hudud and things like da' al-khalq lil-khalq. Leave the people to Allah, to their creator. Leave the created to the creator, basically.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's once again, it's they've got it in their education systems as well. I mean, if they go to a British school in Egypt or something like that, most likely they're being taught by some expat, who's getting good money, maybe 40,000-50,000 pounds, and he's paying little rent because in Egypt the rent is not as expensive, and he wants to go there, save some money, come back to the UK and live his life. And obviously he's going to bring with him all of his dominant ethics, so he's going to teach them what he believes in.
Correct.